Tonight we're going to be continuing our journey through the Gospel of Matthew, and we're going to be taking a look at this portion of the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is amazing in the way that Jesus takes what everybody at that time understood as the law of God, the Ten Commandments, the things that God had called his people to do, and then how Jesus kind of blew the doors off that and expanded for them actually what it meant. One of the biggest knocks against the Pharisees is that they would do the letter of the law, but they wouldn't actually follow the heart of the law. And so Jesus expands. One of the sections I want to take a look at today is this area of marriage. In Deuteronomy 24, verse 1 through 4, Moses said this. He says, "When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he had found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house, and if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the latter man hates her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of the house, or if the latter man dies, who took her to be his wife, then the former husband who sent her away may not take her again as his wife, after she has been defiled. For that would be an abomination to the Lord, and you shall not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance." What the Pharisees then did is they took that chunk of scripture and they said, well, clearly God is giving us permission to get divorced. There's actually two schools of thought during the time amongst the Pharisees during this time of Jesus. The one was the school of thought of Shammai. And the school of Shammai said, well, clearly you have to have some significant reason. There must have to have been some infidelity at some level, and only that is the reason that you can get divorced. But then there was a school of Hillel that said, well, maybe you can get divorced for any reason. Even to the extent of burning dinner, you could get divorced over that. And so there was these two schools of thoughts, and the Pharisees were kind of immersed in this, and Jesus sought to bring clarification. And so in Matthew, in the Gospel of Matthew, during the Sermon on the Mount, he says this. He says, "It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce." But then Jesus says this, "But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife except on the ground of sexual immorality makes her commit adultery." In Matthew 19, the Pharisees asked more questions. And the Pharisees came to him and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" He answered, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let man not separate." They asked him again, "Why did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and send her away?" And he said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery." His disciples after this said, "If such is the case of man and his wife, it's better not to marry." This principle of divorce, Jesus kind of said, is God meant for us to be married to one person for our whole lifetime, to work through it, to reconcile through different difficult situations, to be yoked to this person from the beginning to the end. So much so that even in Corinthians, Paul adds to this discussion, and he says, to the married, he says, "I give this charge." And then he says, "Not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not divorce his wife." So after all this discussion has been said and done, Jesus says it's not so much that I give you permission to get divorced. I give you permission for one reason: sexual immorality. Somebody's cheated on the other. And for some reason, even God looks upon that and says, man, that's just such a big deal that I give you permission to separate that union. But in every other case, he calls us to work through it. In every other case, he calls us to stay together. Even to the point in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, if it's better to live the rest of your life alone than with this person, then okay. But you're not to marry again. In Matthew, Jesus would say, or you commit adultery, and you cause the person with you to commit adultery. And that's probably enough for our historical minute for today.